So, do any of you remember that amazing cold open in season 2 of The Boys? It's one of the most memorable moments in that season where actor Charlie Coons, probably most famous for being in Community, plays this online neckbeard character who's become completely enamored by Stormfront. He buys into all of her racist rhetoric, and as a result, he shoots up a convenience store. Very impactful moment, set the tone for that entire season despite coming very late in the season. Amazing cold open segment, lasts I think all but 3 minutes. This movie is basically that cold open stretched out to 2 hours. Hi everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor. Welcome to Underground Cinema. This week we'll be talking about the 2019 film Cuck. You heard me right, Cuck. C-U-C-K, Cuck. To make this as simple as possible, Cuck is the story of a lower income white guy who has very obvious mental health issues. He lives in the inner city with his mother, who is very demeaning of him. He has no father, so as a male role model, he looks up to this one media personality that he very much wants to emulate. He can't hold down a job, he's bad with women, but eventually forms a sort of fake relationship with a woman he's obsessed with. Things go pretty well for him for a while, until he's eventually humiliated publicly by his idol. This embarrassment sets him over the edge, which inspires him to suffocate his mother to death and then go on a killing spree. Now, if any of that sounded familiar to you, it should, because that's basically the plot of the movie Joker. Why am I bringing up the movie Joker? 3 reasons. Reason number 1, because at time of recording, the sequel to Joker is coming out in about a week, and I'm trying to indirectly capitalize on the release of that film by talking about this one. Reason number 2, because since the films are fairly similar, I want to use Joker as a point of reference when talking about this movie later in the video. And reason number 3, to also use Joker as a springboard to bring up an interesting topic that I'd like to discuss right now. So when it comes to Joker and Cuck, this is not a situation where one film homaged to the other or ripped one off. The reason Joker and Cuck are similar to each other is because they are essentially twin films. Let me elaborate. In the broad scope of human history, there is a very common phenomenon known as multiple discovery. Multiple discovery is essentially when different people in different places come up with similar ideas or inventions at roughly the same time. Examples of this in history would be like how Sir Isaac Newton formulated calculus at around the same time as Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Another notable example would be like how Karl Marx and Vilfredo Pareto both came up with similar economic theories in the late 1800s. This is a very common phenomena that exists throughout human history, and it happens a lot with movies. You've probably seen this firsthand, where different movies come out at the same time and they have very similar plots or setups, like the animated movie Ants coming out at the same time as the Pixar movie A Bug's Life in 1998. There's also Snow White and the Huntsman and Mirror Mirror. Probably one of the more notable recent examples would be White House Down and Olympus Has Fallen. People talked about that for like a hot minute when those movies came out. This is an extremely common occurrence. It's even happened to me. I wrote a short script commenting on the failure of mental health services in America back in 2022, and I titled the short film Smile. And about 8 months later, the horror film Smile, having to do with the concept of trauma, came out in theaters. Not only that, but I found out that the director of that film, Parker Finn, actually went to school near me. So it just goes to show you how this sort of thing can occur. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. Art imitates life, life imitates art. If you are a writer, then you're basically obligated to keep your finger on the pulse of world events and culture at all times. So if something significant happens or a trend takes hold, then that's just breeding ground for inspiration. Frankly, it's a miracle that there aren't more films that are this similar, but that's pretty much what's going on with Joker and Cuck. Both films deal with very similar subject matter, have protagonists that deal with similar issues, but the weirdest thing is that they didn't just come out at around the same time, they came out exactly the same day. Joker and Cuck both came out October 4th, 2019. It's weird to say the least. In any case, going into this film, I fully expected to hate it. I actually initially heard heard about it when it originally came out back in 2019, what I was mainly hearing about it was that it was essentially just a worse version of Joker tackling similar ideas, but with a modern day framing to make itself trendy. So after hearing that, I dismissed it. I never really felt the drive to watch this movie because I really feel like when it comes to a lot of like modern social commentary, writers tend to fall on their faces. Gone are the days of nuance, socio-political writing from master classes like Rod Serling. Everything has to be shoved down your throat these days. No sense of nuance whatsoever. But with all that being said, watching Cuck, I don't think it's a film without merit. I think that a lot of the ideas it tackles in an interesting way. Most of it feels naturally derived. The narrative is constructed around the ideas. There's interesting character work done really well. Overall, I feel like the film had a lot going for it, and if it had come out at another time, even early 2020, I feel like it would have done really well. But all that being said, I do feel like the film drops the ball where it really counts. Now, before I get into that, I should bring up what I think is genuinely good about this film. I think the setting of this film works perfectly for the story that they're trying to tell. You're telling the story of a politically radicalized conservative character who just can't get ahead in life. If you want to maximize his discontent, you have to put him in an area like Southern California. You need to put him in LA. LA is one of the most politically progressive cities in the country, and it makes perfect sense why a character living here and living here in poverty would be extremely unhappy. Hell, speaking as someone who's actually spent time in inner city Los Angeles, I could see why anyone would be unhappy living there, political radicalization or not. I also think aesthetically this film really works. I really enjoy the cinematography for this film. A lot of people would say, oh, it's dreary, it's uninspired, but that's kind of the point. The main character of the story is a significantly unhappy young man. It makes perfect sense that his world would be colorless and muted. I think the most vibrant colors that you see in the movie are actually on his computer screen, which makes perfect sense because his character in the film feels inspired and powerful in the online space. He feels like he is somebody. Meanwhile, when you get to the actual camera work, there's a lot of uncomfortable angles, a lot of close-ups on certain areas that you might consider gratuitous, but it makes perfect sense when you consider the type of character that we're following and the kind of desires that he has, which leads us into the character study aspect. Apparently, the creative forces behind this film, Rob Lambert and Vakle, they were inspired to make this film based on all these stories of radicalization online and mass shootings that were spreading around back in the 2010s. They decided it would be interesting to tell the story of a loner type character who would buy into online ideology. Apparently, to construct the main character, Ronnie, they spent a lot of time researching the online alt-right communities and tried to make the most realistic version of a radicalized character that they could. And I think they mostly succeeded at that. There are moments in this film, certain behaviors that the main character exhibits or lines of dialogue that feel almost like a caricature. You could roll your eyes at a few things, but as someone who actually went through the modern university system and has dealt with people on both sides of the political spectrum quite intensely, I think this depiction of a politically radicalized individual mostly reigns true. And a lot of that strong character writing is really elevated by the performance. Zachary Ray Sherman was an amazing choice to play the character of Ronnie. I've only seen him in one other movie, that being Archie's Final Project, which is one of my favorite films, but that's a movie that came out 10 years before Cuck. Regarding his acting, I haven't seen any of his other work. I virtually had no frame of reference going into this film. He sells it so well. From the first scene, you can perfectly tell that this is a lonely and alienated individual. You perfectly understand how isolated he feels, how he feels like no one listens to him. There's very little dialogue at the beginning of the film. You're mainly meant to understand the character through his actions and his facial expressions, and Zachary Ray Sherman sells it. The main character is also quite disheveled. Apparently Sherman put on 45 pounds to play this character, and it shows. There was never really any point in this movie where I felt pulled out by his performance. Watching him act out this type of character, it felt disturbingly real. Like, this is a character you can see running into in real life and that you wouldn't want to interact with at all. He's vulnerable, he's insecure, but he's also very clearly unstable. And Sherman really sells that, particularly in his eyes. In a lot of scenes, you see him as sort of this lost puppy dog, but in so many of the other shots, you can just see that dead look in his eyes. You can tell that this is a broken man, that he's missing something important in his life. It really reminds me of the way Anthony Starr plays Homelander in The Boys. Which, funny thing, when I was watching the film, like I said, I wasn't pulled out at all, but there was a couple moments where I thought to myself, this kid sort of looks and feels like a young Homelander. And I looked up a picture of the normal Zachary Ray Sherman and was sort of startled. I was like, whoa, he really looks like Anthony Starr. And maybe it's just me. I'll put up a picture right here. You can pause the video real quick, see if you can tell which actor is which. Okay, you done? Here's the answers. Did you get it right? Let me know if you got it right. The performance really elevates the writing, which I think is already strong. There's a lot of interesting elements of this film that contribute to the overall character of Ronnie feeling realistic, like the fact that he has no father figure in his life. That's part of the reason why his character wants to join the military, because his father was a soldier. He wears around his father's camo gear every chance he gets. He's looked to other places to see if he can find a strong male role model to follow. Aside from Chance, the right-wing media influencer that he worships, the only real male role model in his life is a mechanic named Larry, who is racist, but is ironically probably one of the most moral characters in the film. He's the closest example to a responsible male character in this story outside of a single convenience store clerk. It just really goes to show you how Ronnie as a character has been set up to fail. It's really an element of the film that highlights how broken this character is, but unfortunately, the film itself doesn't lean all the way into it. I mean, ultimately, it's fine, show, don't tell, but it really feels like amidst all the other commentary made in this film, the movie could have taken the opportunity to express how difficult it is for young men in America to grow up without fathers, and how that has a significant effect on society. I mean, President Obama himself even acknowledged this, the fact that children who grow up without fathers are 5 times more likely to turn to crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. It's a big deal that affects everyone, and it's only gone up in America over time. It's probably the biggest social issue that we're dealing with right now, and I feel like the movie missed a trick not referencing that, especially since you see the results of these statistics in the character of Ronnie, like the fact that he never went to college, and like the fact that his character has a record and a probation officer. I mean, that's a big reason for why the character of Ronnie gets stuck in an online echo chamber. It's also a big source of his insecurity. He as a character constantly puts down other men that he refers to as cucks or pussies. And the ironic thing is that he's a very weak man. He's a very vulnerable man. He's not good with women, which is probably because he grew up without a male influence in his life. And all of this ultimately culminates in him abandoning his own morals to become what he hates the most. He becomes a cuckold. A big plot point in the film is that he gets involved with this older couple who do amateur and he never actually gets to have sex with the woman. He just stands in the corner, watches, and yanks it as she's getting pounded by a black guy. It's literally the most humiliating thing his character could experience, and he does it voluntarily. I legitimately cannot think of right now a more ironic twist for a character. And it's this lapse in his own judgment that leads to his downfall. Ronnie spends a good portion of the film trying to become an alt-right influencer. He calls himself True Patriot 89. He models himself after his favorite media personality, Chance Dahlman. Him and Chance actually do meet in the film, and they seem to really hit it off, but then Chance immediately turns on Ronnie when he finds out about all the amateur. This is what forces Ronnie to spiral and eventually go on his killing spree. Now, anyone who was paying attention could immediately predict where this film was going from the beginning. It was very obvious from the start that Ronnie was an unstable individual. The reason he's not able to get into the army is because he can't pass the psych test. He has an obsession with the guns, which is borderline sexual. Like, you can tell immediately what this character is eventually going to do. But the film being predictable is not where it falls apart. Where it falls apart is failing to tie everything together. Like I said, the closest point of comparison I can make to this film is the movie Joker, which dealt with similar themes of fatherlessness and economic depression and mental health and social apathy. It's a movie that handles these sensitive topics in a very earnest way, while still leaving a very shocking impression on the viewer. What you're supposed to take away is the understanding that those people who fall through the cracks of society can crawl back up as monsters. I mean, the first scene of Joker is the character of Arthur getting robbed and then beaten up, and there is no better visual metaphor for what the film is trying to tell you. The film is telling you not to kick people when they're down. The movie does a perfect job creating sympathy and understanding and fear and tying all those things together. But with Cuck, despite exploring similar themes, there is no sympathy for the character Ronnie. The ideas about online brainwashing and his central character flaw of growing up without a father, while they are present in the climax of the film, it doesn't feel like the viewer is supposed to take anything away from those aspects of his character. By the end, it feels like there was sort of no purpose to the film. Now, to be fair, you can make a film without purpose or meaning, like American Graffiti, Dazed and Confused, The Big Lebowski, but with those movies, there's a value behind them because they're about the experience. They're slice of life movies, essentially. And while you certainly can dig for deeper meaning in them, that's not the point. The point is for you to go along for the ride and enjoy yourself. Now, with a character study like Cuck, you can say that the takeaway is learning how this character got from point A to point B. But the film deals with so many complex ideas regarding politics, radicalization, racism, mental health, fatherlessness. It feels like there should have been a grander takeaway from the movie, and there just wasn't. A lot of people who actually saw this film called it divisive, presumably because of the subjects it deals with, but personally, I don't think this film is divisive, it's just not satisfying narratively. Like, the film is a tragedy, but you can still take something away from a tragedy. Like Double Indemnity, that was a tragedy, and the takeaway of that film was obviously just don't fall for easy tricks. Maintain a sense of moral fortitude. But with Cuck, it just feels like a hollow film. I mean, I understand that we're just watching a character spiral into psychosis, but it feels like there's no value in the experience, and the film desperately wants you to think that there is. I mean, throughout the film, you're basically just watching a guy get dealt the worst possible cards you can imagine, when he already didn't know how to play the game. The film opens up with a quote from Immanuel Kant, one of the fathers of modern moral philosophy, and the metaphor you're supposed to glean from the quote is basically you shouldn't complain if you're pathetic because it's your own fault. There's just so much contempt for the main character in this story, and yet the film expects you to remain invested in what's going on in his narrative. Like, by the end of the story, you see like this lost clip from Ronnie, and he's talking about how good he feels like his life is going. And it's clear that that was supposed to be an ending that showed the humanity of his character, which I can appreciate, but to me, it feels like it was just a guy who was deluding himself. Like I said, I didn't feel any sympathy for Ronnie by the end of the film. And it's because I don't feel like the story gave me reason to, even though there were many reasons to. Ultimately, we were just watching the story of a guy who didn't know what the right decisions were, but also clearly needed to take personal responsibility for himself. But he didn't know how to do that. No one offers Ronnie help, even though he has very clear mental health problems. Not even his probation officer. Even his mother says it in the movie. He's never been mature. He needs guidance. I mean, I'll give credit where credit's due. The film feels realistic. Ronnie feels like a real character. And he's a character I can understand. But by the end of the film, it feels like the movie just throws him away. I mean, who knows? Maybe the point of the story was just showing the red flags that you should look for in people like this. But you know what? I think that's pretty shitty. So, let me give you a better moral. If there's anything that you, the viewer, you take away from this review, it should be this advice. If you find yourself in a situation like the character of Ronnie, if you're lonely and alienated, then the best thing you can do is focus on improving yourself. Trust me when I say, I understand that life is not fair. When there's people at the top making decisions, sometimes you find it the case that you will never be given the opportunities you feel like you deserve. That there are people in the world that will never give you a shot. And those people, they'll never tell you the truth. I understand that. It's hard in life when you feel like you're making all the right decisions, when you feel like you set yourself up the right way, but you just don't understand what's going wrong, and no one in your life is helping you understand why. So if you find yourself in a situation or an environment where you are legitimately losing your mind, you need to get out of that. You need to find better people that will help lift you up, that will actually support you. And when I say support you, I don't mean coddle you, I don't mean hype you up. Support is when you have people in your life who care enough to call you out on your bullshit. People who will actually offer you constructive criticism, who will tell you honestly what they think your flaws are and how they think you can improve. And if you feel like they genuinely have your best interests at heart, you owe them to at least take what they're saying with a grain of salt, because you can always improve. You owe it to yourself to become the best possible version of yourself. Don't let yourself become a Ronnie. Don't let the anger get to you. It's easy to do, but don't blame the world for your situation. Just do your best to pull yourself out of it and look for people that will help you do that. So yeah, that was my review of the 2019 film Cuck. If you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. And I will see you later.